Hello, Namaste, Sat Sri Akal, Vanakkam. It is May the 15th, Sunday, and I'm Jagjit bringing you the 63rd episode of Weekly Takes Saptahiki from New York. It is around 15 degrees Celsius and it has been raining since yesterday evening, which has brought a little bit of cold. A lot has happened around the globe since we last talked. Sri Lanka, Philippines, we need to talk about them. We'll do so very briefly, but in keeping with your suggestions, we'll discuss the various issues one after the other. And in one of the most memorable moments for Indian sports, the men's badminton team beat 14-time world champions and holders Indonesia in the final on Sunday to win a maiden gold medal at Thomas Cup. Congratulations, Team India. What a time to begin the day. In this episode, we'll follow up on our discussion on the Russia-Ukraine war and its impact, focusing on America. We had dealt it briefly in the last episode. Today, we'll talk about it in detail. We'll also briefly go back to talk about the reasons of the war, just to recap. What do the American people think? How has the war impacted the economy of USA? Has the administration handled it wisely? How do people rate President Biden after all this? Will the war affect the chances of the Democratic Party in the November midterm elections? A lot is in our plate. Let's begin. After the disintegration of the USSR and the end of Cold War, Soviet leaders preferred that US forces remain in Europe and NATO stay intact. The Russian leaders did not want NATO to grow any larger and assumed that Western diplomats understood their concerns. The Clinton administration at that time evidently thought otherwise. And in the mid-1990s, it began pushing for NATO to expand. The first round of expansion took place in 1999, which brought in the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. The second expansion occurred in 2004, and it included Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia. Warning signs for Russia. Moscow complained bitterly from the very start, but the story did not end there. NATO began looking to expand further east. With power comes the tendency to expand and exert supremacy. I had related in my earlier episode also as to how in April 2008 summit in Bucharest, NATO considered admitting Georgia and Ukraine. George W. Bush, the then president, supported the move. But France and Germany opposed the move for fear that it would unduly antagonize Russia. Putin maintained that admitting those two countries to NATO would represent a direct threat to Russia, way back in 2008. But in the quest of proving its supremacy, US kept trying to expand eastward. Victoria Nuland, US Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, estimated in December 2013 that the United States had invested more than $5 billion since 1991 to help Ukraine achieve the future it deserves. As part of that effort, the US government had funded the National Endowment for Democracy, a non-profit foundation which in turn funded more than 60 projects aimed at promoting civil society in Ukraine. The above examples should be an eye-opener to people around the globe of the machinations of the United States through civil society, who are ever eager to get funds. Same goes with journalists who are money-trapped to write against the government not conducive to the desires of the West. All this was in keeping with the United States' triple package of policies: NATO enlargement, EU expansion, and democracy promotion, which added fuel to a fire waiting to ignite. The regime change in Ukraine was that fire. As a leaked telephone recording revealed, Victoria Nuland had advocated regime change and wanted the Ukrainian politician Arseniy Yatsenyuk to become prime minister in the new government, which he did. This was enough for the Russian leaders. The United Nations may not like Russia's position, but it should understand the logic behind it. Any country, howsoever small or powerful it may be, it is always sensitive to potential threats near their home territory. And even the mighty United States does not tolerate distant great powers deploying military forces anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, much less on its borders. Imagine the outrage here if China built an impressive military alliance and tried to include Canada and Mexico in it. As Indians, are we not worried about China helping and allying with countries in our neighborhood, more so along our borders? But at the same time, peace must prevail and talks towards end of war should be in the forefront. And that is how and why India has maintained a neutral position on the issue. Now let us talk about how Americans view the Russia-Ukraine war. More than 2 months into Russia-Ukraine war, a majority of people see the conflict as a stalemate, and fears of a wider war in Europe remain high. The latest Rasmussen Reports online survey finds that 42% of the likely US voters believe the war in Ukraine is basically a stalemate. 25% think Ukraine is winning the war, while 15% say Russia is winning and another 18% are not sure. As per another poll reported by the Brookings Institute, although US government messaging on Ukraine has been partly focused on defending democracy around the world, most Americans across the partisan divide, Republicans as well as Democrats, don't believe US is now a good model for democracy. Only 27% say that democracy in the US is a good example for other countries to follow, including 28% of Democrats and 29% of Republicans. A large majority, 61%, say the US used to be a good example but has not been in recent years, including 64% of Republicans and 58% of Democrats. Such is the public opinion about democracy within the United States. Poll results show that Americans feel NATO expansion played a key role in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. 38% say expansion of NATO played a key role. Russian invasion of Ukraine, 41% say NATO expansion played a small but not a key role, while only 21% say it played no role. Americans are divided whether their country should be leading the international opposition to the Russian invasion, with 47% saying that the US should be the one to lead, while 53% say it should not. All these opinions are reflected in the tanking of popularity of President Biden. As a result of the invasion of Ukraine, the US-led West launched an unprecedented sanctions against Russia, which have been called by experts as the economic weapons of mass destruction that would ultimately destroy the Russian economy. But are they working? Let's look at it. The sanctions are like a double-edged sword. They inflict pain on Russia, but also imposed costs on their imposers. The West, in fact, is caught in a trap. The sanctions and the deepening conflict, by helping to raise global commodity and energy prices, translate into higher revenues for Moscow, in spite of a significant decrease in its exports. And the higher international prices, by fueling inflation, mean political trouble at home for those behind the sanctions. We too feel the gas price hike and prices of almost everything going up, be it grocery or anything else, including shortage of baby food. Already voices are being raised that Ukraine can get $40 billion in one day, but American mothers struggling to feed their babies have to wait 2 weeks for a hearing scheduled for May 25th. Look at another paradox. Despite Russia being cut off from the world's financial arteries, the Russian ruble has dramatically recovered through state intervention, but as if to signal that Japan is paying a price for following the US lead on Russia. The Japanese yen, the world's third most traded currency, has sunk to a 20-year low against the US dollar, ranking this year as the worst performing of the 41 currencies tracked, worse even than the ruble. In other words, Japan is a collateral damage and is paying the price. Look at another paradox. Russia sold fossil fuels worth $64 billion to those who had imposed sanctions. In the first 2 months of the Ukraine war, which helped Russia to nearly double its revenues, according to a report of a Finland-registered think tank, the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. The top 18 importers, with the sole exception of China, were the sanctions imposers, with the European Union alone accounting for 71% of the purchases of Russian fuels in this period. While Turkey, South Korea, and Japan also remained reliant on Russian energy supplies, the European Union's imports of gas, oil, and coal from Russia totaled around almost $46 billion in the 2 months period, compared with about $146 billion for the whole of 2021. We need to also take into account that Russia is the world's richest country when it comes to natural resources, including serving amongst the world's largest exporters of natural gas, uranium, nickel, oil, coal, aluminum, copper, wheat, fertilizers, and precious metals such as palladium, which is more precious than gold and used largely in catalytic converters. Through no fault of theirs, the real losers from the Russia-NATO conflict sadly are the poorer countries, which are bearing the brunt of the economic fallout. From Peru to Sri Lanka, rising fuel, food, and fertilizer prices have triggered violent street protests, which in some states have spiraled into continuing political turmoil. The debt woes of many poorer nations have deepened. We have an example of Sri Lanka where the regime changed due to debt woes. The irony is that despite employing all possible coercive economic instruments against Russia and making it difficult to negotiate an end to the war, the Biden White House does not believe that sanctions alone will work, which explains why the government maintains the formula of no boots on the ground, on the one hand, fearing people's outcry, but at the same time, it has increasingly turned to weapon supply, including asking Congress for a staggering $40 billion in additional military and economic funds to fuel the conflict and stymie the Russian war objectives. But the sanctions, by signaling the advent of a new era of US-led unilateralism, are likely to weaken and ultimately even undermine the Western-controlled global financial architecture that they are meant to defend. And it is herein why countries, including India, are asking for reshaping of the world bodies like the WTO, WHO, etc. Alongside the economic sanctions, the West always employs a massive disinformation campaign against someone whom it perceives as its enemies. Since his February 24 invasion of Ukraine got underway, the 69-year-old Russian president's deteriorating health has been a subject of frenzied speculation, from cancer to almost dying, coming from very reliable sources. Same happened with North Korea. But have we questioned the health conditions of our own President Biden? And it is perhaps because of that a survey conducted in January and February found that 51% of Democratic and Democratic-leaning voters wanted to see the party nominate a different candidate than Biden in 2024. Matters became worse after February polls. In April 2022, over 80% of Russians approved of activities of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The popularity level saw an increase during the Russian invasion of Ukraine that started at the end of February 2022. On the other hand, President Biden enjoyed majority approval ratings during his first 2 quarters in office, the so-called honeymoon period. A trying late summer and early fall 2021 marked by a surge in new coronavirus cases, the troubled US withdrawal from Afghanistan, and rapidly increasing gas prices and inflation led to a decline in Biden's public support. His job approval ratings in 8 Gallup polls conducted since September have ranged narrowly between 40 to 43%. Will it impact the November midterm elections? Yes. My analysis is simple. People tend to maintain status quo as long as their pocket is not hurt, and therefore they vote for the day's government. But with inflation this high, the Democrats may lose a significant number of seats. Remember, it was Corona and the economy which led to Trump's losing the elections. It's economy again, coupled with memory of the fiasco in Afghanistan and the Russia-Ukraine war and rising prices. Already voices have been raised about House approving $40 billion to aid Ukraine and help protect their border, while here, our border is a disaster. What do you think? Write in the comment box. MorningConsult.com echoes my analysis by saying that Biden is underwater by double digits in 33 of the 50 states. A gunman embracing a white supremacist ideology opened fire yesterday afternoon at a supermarket in a predominantly black neighborhood of Buffalo, upstate New York. This shooting killed 10 people and wounded 3 more. The mass shooting was the deadliest in the United States this year and among a spate of racist attacks in recent years. Why are such incidents happening across America? Only a few days back, 3 Korean women were shot dead in Dallas by an unknown gunman. Some time back, we had shooting in the subway in New York City. Who is to blame? What has gone wrong? What is the cause? Our short-sightedness? Or our lack of a sound policy? Or disenchantment among the people? We are trying to teach the world, but are we learning ourselves? It is time. We opened up the book and learned. Enough is enough. No more killings. What are your views about it? Please write in the comment box. We'll talk about it in the next episode. And before we end, let's move to our most loved segment of Saptahiki, some little known but unknown facts about New York. Did you know about the diverse population of New York City? Yes, you did. But do you know this? New York City has the largest Polish population outside of Warsaw. The same goes for Jewish people outside of Israel. And it has the largest Chinese population outside of Asia too. And at the same time, it has the largest Chinatown in the world. I'm talking of Queens and not the one in Manhattan. And it has also the largest Puerto Rican population of any city in the world. And for another interesting fact, did you know that there are more than 340,000 millionaires in the city, and it also houses the largest number of billionaires in the world? Are you one of them? Or do you aspire to be one? Then your place is New York City. And did you know that New York has over 120 colleges and universities? Strange? That is about the popularity of New York. That is all I have for you today. Waiting for your comments to develop the structure of the next episode, where we'll talk about the goings-on in India and neighboring Sri Lanka. What went wrong? Who is to be blamed? Is it the policies of the leadership? We will also talk about the new government in Philippines. And as a follow-up of the Russia-Ukraine war, we'll also discuss in detail as to how India stands to gain because of its neutral stance from the Russia-Ukraine war. Is India to supply wheat to the world, or is India gaining by selling oil to the European Union? Is it not the acumen of the leadership of Prime Minister Modi? Is that why the Prime Minister went to Europe recently? Much more to come in the next episode. And yes, we'll also talk about the Chintan Shivir of the Congress Party. I have many insider details. Watch out for Saptahiki-63. And yes, if you liked the program, please press the like button. And to keep yourself informed about the future programs, subscribe the channel. Till next week, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.